Good morning, all. It's 11 o'clock here in the UK. So we'll get started in about maybe 1 minute's time. But welcome. We've got a very, very, very long title to this webinar. On the previous screen, it had the full title, but I'll give you the summary. So we're today looking at the similarities and differences between the FCA and DFSA regulation for payment services firms seeking expansion. So looking across the UK and Dubai. So some pretty exciting topics. We're going to be covering everything from the similarities, differences, what's the same, what's different, and what you need to consider if you're looking at those two jurisdictions. So this is obviously hosted and presented by Thistle Initiatives, and we've also got Clarity Solutions as well. So a nice combined webinar from the two of us. So we've done about a minute's worth of introductions in the miserable, rainy UK and hopefully a bit of a sunny Dubai. So I'm going to loosely get started. Hopefully, if anyone else joins, they can, of course, welcome to the party here today. So to introduce everyone, the speakers today, I'm Jess, the head of financial crime at Thistle Initiative. So I head up our financial crime practice. Of course, we do everything from AML, sanctions, fraud, all of these crazy, wonderful things for a whole range of different firm types. But we are not here today to talk about financial crime. We're here to talk all things payment services. So we've got some excellent range of speakers we'll start with Lorraine in a second, but before I move on to Lorraine, I'll give a little bit of a background about Thistle itself. So Thistle Initiatives is a specialist governance, risk and compliance consultancy. We've been going for 10 years or so now. So we provide lots of expert compliance support. We guide firms through things like FCA authorisation processes, lots of ongoing advice and support for the full breadth of financial services industry, etc. So of course, we do a lot of the authorisations pieces that we're going to be speaking about today. Enough from me. Lorraine, do you want to do a quick summary and an introduction to yourself?
Hello, everyone, and thank you, Jessica. Absolutely. As Jess said, I'm Lorraine Moat, and I head up the payment services team here at Thistle Initiative. So, in effect, we look after any business that falls within that sort of e-money payment institution space. And the majority of the work that we do, it has to be said, is focused on the application process itself. So we guide firms through the good, the bad, and the ugly of getting through the FCA's perimeter, making sure that they're well organised and they are prepared to face into any questions or any queries that the FCA may have in reaching that approval stage. So absolutely. But apart from that, obviously we do support in other areas of regulation, post authorisation, anything that comes within the life cycle of a payments firm. We're there to provide that regulatory support and guidance.
Perfect. So FCA authorization wizard for sure, then, Lorraine.
Yeah.
All right. So Barry, over to you. A little introduction from yourself.
Yes, hello everyone. So Clarity Solutions are a compliance service provider based in Dubai. We are in the DIFC and also ADGM, so we focus on the financial free zones. I'm also the head of our fintech team, so I look after the payment services authorizations that we support and license applications, amongst other license activities. I'm joined today by my colleague Sarah Smith. Sarah heads up our licensing team, so she works across all licensing, coming into specifically the DIFC and ADGM, and she's worked with us for a number of years, and we find that benefits the process. So we have an overview in one area of the licensing process, and then I specifically support with things like payment services.
Perfect. I don't know, Sarah, do you want to add anything else as well?
No, I think Barry covered most of it. Yeah, so I mean, I look after licensing. So as Barry pointed out, that covers all sorts of licensed activities on firms seeking authorizations. We also provide support to firms who are already licensed and operating in the centre and require ongoing ad hoc support, the provision of a compliance officer, MLRO, risk officer, and so forth. We provide those services as well.
Amazing. And please tell me it's sunny in Dubai, because compared to the UK right now, we're all looking for a bit of sun.
It's always sunny in Dubai. Actually, we had a little bit of
It is.
rain, but no, mostly sunny.
Perfect, perfect. So we've got an expert range of panelists then to talk all things authorization in terms of payments across both the UK and Dubai, which is amazing. So, I mean, again, just a little bit of a summary of why we're here today. We're looking at those similarities and differences between the two jurisdictions because we know that lots of firms want to operate across multiple areas, and it can be challenging to figure out how you deal with those comparisons. So we will be focusing specifically on payment services firms in this session. So anything along the lines of e-money providers, electronic money institutions, payment institutions, as well as, account information service providers, payment initiation service providers, all of the fancy acronyms there. So we're going to be covering everything in the payment space and looking at how you deal with those challenges. So we're going to look at the requirements you face when operating in the UK and the UAE. And then 2, looking really at the points that you need to be aware of when you go through the authorization process. So we're going to take a pretty good journey today. Okay, that's enough of me. Maybe move to the next slide and we'll get started with the conversation. So we have been pulling together some of the common sort of questions, scenarios that we face all the time when we're dealing with our clients. There are lots of questions that we get across these 3 stages. So where do you even start when you're looking to apply for authorization? So that's phase number 1 we're going to deep dive into. Then we're going to look at number 2, which is the application phase itself. And we're going to spend quite a chunky bit of time here talking about what the journey looks like, what the milestones are, and how you can prepare best as, part of that journey. And then part number 3, we're going to be looking at the post-submission. So how do you deal with interviewing and those sort of things once you've handed in the documents and you're looking at that post-submission phase. If you do have any additional questions, though, so we've got a lot of questions and themes that we're going to be covering, but please do use the Q&A button. I think it's either at the top or bottom of your screen, depending on how you've got Zoom set up. We're going to be monitoring those, and I'll try to pick out some questions as we go through. Don't put any questions into the chat function. We're only going to be looking at the Q&A, so make sure it goes into the Q&A box only. All right, that's definitely enough of me. So let's get started on the sort of Q&A part of the session. We're going to answer lots of questions, but again, throw them into the chat. So maybe we start. So looking at part 1, the pre-application phase, right at the beginning of the journey. Perhaps if I start with you, Lorraine, what are the key thoughts that firms need to take into consideration when they're really starting this process? So particularly, of course, on the FCA in the UK, any key things for firms to actually think about just at the start?
Yeah, absolutely. The main thing for firms to think about is something called the FCA's threshold conditions. Now, firms might not look at it in terms of that label, but the type of things they need to be thinking about before they embark on that journey to FCA authorization, which is pretty crucial, I guess, to ensuring that your firm's going to align with those threshold conditions, and it will just help you get ready pre-application sort of stage. So the main things that you need to really think about and answer questions to yourself on are you a business that's already incorporated in the UK? You've got to have the right sort of legal, I guess, set up as a business in the UK before you can even take a step forward. So that's a kind of first thing to consider. Another big part of the pre-process, I guess, is to think about where is the mind and management of your organisation, something the FCA we know is super close to, and your application won't even get off the starting blocks if you've not got this right. So what do I mean by mind and management? It means, are the people who are going to be directing and controlling your business going to be based and functioning out of the UK? So that means you cannot have your CEO, for example, operating in France or Germany or anywhere else around the world. They've got to be resident and functioning from the UK. And I think establishing a sort of strong presence of mind and management in the UK, having those key decision makers here, including senior managers and also some board members, is just something the FCA needs to ensure that you're going to be able to facilitate, I guess, effective oversight and governance of your business. Another biggie is, what are the skills and capabilities of those key individuals, And in particular, always draw attention to the money laundering reporting officer. If that person, along with likes of your CEO or anyone else that's senior in your business, doesn't possess the right level of expertise or experience, then that is something that you need to sort before you even make a step forward. Have you got the right systems and controls in place? So there's no point in steaming ahead if you don't have your sort of ducks in a row. You don't know what you're going to be doing, because it's just going to prevent you from, I guess, developing some of those policies and procedures as part of the actual application process if you don't know what you're doing. And are you well funded? Because the FCA will not let you walk into business with them being a regulated firm unless you can meet their capital requirements. But I think most importantly, it's, do you have a proper business structure and strategy? Do you know what it is you want to be doing? Have you got your plans all set out? And all of these bits I've just mentioned are therefore then the nuts and bolts that kind of follow on to sort of realise your vision, I guess. So those would be the key things to think about before you even come to speak to us even, and step ahead on that journey.
Yeah, it's always really difficult because, firms have to get a lot in place right at the start before they can even operate. And it can be very, very difficult. Out of interest, what are the kind of we deal with a lot of, very, very small firms as well as much larger firms that are moving across to the UK. But perhaps for those really small sort of immature firms, what are the real common reasons that you say, hang on a second, you're just not ready? What's the kind of common failure point here at this stage?
Yeah, and I think that's a really good thing to think about and talk about. And we're always very, very honest with our clients, where we think, you're not quite ready. Yeah, I'm not gonna onboard you and take you down a road I know you're not going to be successful in. So you need to go off and fix these things. The things that tend to need to be fixed, just to my sort of final point on the last question you asked, is about the business plan or strategy. Quite often it's about having an undeveloped business plan or strategy. So it's not quite there yet. It's like you've got a great idea, but you just don't know exactly how it's going to play out. It's not going to fly. You need to know exactly what it is you want to do. And I think so that lack of comprehensive and well thought through business plan, where it outlines your objectives, operations, and even things like risk management, growth strategies, because going forward with like a vague or incomplete business plan is just going to signal to the FCA that, you know what, you've not really considered what it is you want to do, so you're not ready. And that inadequate strategy then leaves some gaps. And it's a bit of an unclear roadmap, really, that the FCA will get very, very nervous about. And it's also going to impact your ability to demonstrate your long-term viability and commitment to the regulator. But other things, again, just similar to what I've said before, they've not quite got people in place. So they've got people, but maybe they're not in the right jurisdiction. So they have to spend time locating and onboarding the right people. Or maybe they have the people, but we realise through our conversations, they're not the right skill set, they've not got the right background, they've not got the right experience that we know the FCA will look for. So it's generally around those areas that we would ask firms to sort of step away and go have a think about how they're going to address some of those situations before we take them forward, and even before they start putting pen to paper. Yeah.
The practical side of moving people to the UK is often something that's not considered, but it's really, really critical.
It is very critical. And the thing is, like pre-Brexit, of course, that was an easier thing to do. Now, someone finding the right to move to and the right to work in the UK is a whole other ball game. So yeah, lots to think about.
Definitely. Shifting to the sunnier side, to Dubai, so not moving to the UK after Dubai. Same question here on your side. Sarah, what sort of questions do firms need to think about when they're just starting out on the journey in Dubai?
Yeah, and before I start, I just want to say I'm actually recovering from a virus, so I apologize. My voice is very croaky, and I have a terrible cough. So if at any point I need to stop and cough, I apologize in advance. There are many of those factors that Lorraine has kindly pointed out are very much the same, but there are some differences. So one point I picked up on, which is actually quite different, is incorporation in the DIFC or the DFSA happens after the financial services approval or the regulatory approval. So you don't actually incorporate first, you actually incorporate at the end of that process, which is the reverse to what happens in the UK. So I just thought I'd point that out. That's something that does confuse a lot of people. Capital requirements are equally important as it is in the UK, as is residency, so having mind and management here. So equally in the UK, it's expected that you have the people that are running the business and controlling the business doing so from that region. That is also very important in Dubai. We do see some firms that come in that don't quite grasp that concept, and perhaps if they're offering something on an online platform and you can do that anywhere, don't quite understand that you do need to have a presence here, you do need to have office space here, people here, living here, committed to the region and providing that service here. So that's something that's also important to consider. I guess from our side, regulators will often engage in preliminary discussions quite early on with our firms. So this is before a business plan is submitted or an application is put together. And it's really crucial that during these early interactions that firms can showcase a well-defined business model and articulate the flow of money. So as Lorraine said, a very well thought through business plan. You need to be very clear about what you're going to do and how it's going to work or what the flow of money looks like. And that needs to be sort of ready from the very beginning. So a well-defined business model, but also it needs to be aligned to the regulatory framework. So we see some firms coming in from the UK that already carry out certain activities in the UK and that want to carry that over to the DIFC, but the framework is different. It's a different set of rules and there are different license permissions, and there are some limitations for firms doing payment services in the DIFC. So, I mean, we won't cover them all in detail today, but for instance, when it comes to issuing stored value, for example, firms in the DIFC are restricted from holding, from storing more than US $5,000, and transactions are capped at $1,000 US. The activity of issuing stored value is primarily designed in this jurisdiction for use by natural retail clients and has been developed in that way to accommodate other jurisdictions within the UAE that also govern payment services in those locations. So that's just one example. Another great example is the activity of operating or providing a payment account was intended for corporate clients specifically. So basically merchants, for example, who want to use the account to collect money from customers and then sweep that into their bank account. And so for that reason, funds can only be held for a short period of time. And another final example is foreign exchange can't be carried out as a standalone activity. It has to be ancillary to providing another money services activity. So these sorts of things need to be factored into your business plan. You can't necessarily just pick up your business and move it over to Dubai and do the exact same thing in the exact same way. It is a different jurisdiction and a complex jurisdiction, given that we have so many jurisdictions within the UAE doing different things. So yeah, defined business model again is equally important, commitment to the region. And I guess one final point is, and which Lorraine also said, was appropriate resources. So that's both in terms of your capital and your people. So having the right people with the right skills and experience to be carrying out that service here. So very similar, but some differences there as well.
Now, that's really interesting. Some really, really interesting differences there. And one of the things that was nice to hear is that the regulator engages nice and early, which is, again, a little bit different to what they do in the UK. But perhaps I want to pick up on that final point a little bit more. So we've talked a lot about sort of the business strategy, getting the business plan in order. But what about that people side? What sort of people do you need to have in place at this stage? Maybe Barry, if you can give us some insights.
Yeah, sure. So in terms of people, obviously similar to what Lorraine outlined, you will need to have individuals identified. Now, they don't necessarily need to be even employees of the firm. Just the intention is there, and they need to know who they are for the application stage, which is quite important for firms thinking of coming into the region, so they don't need to commit to boots on the ground straight away during the application stage, but you just need to know who those people are that they will move across when you get to what's called the in-principle stage. So key individuals being obviously the SEO, as they're called, or the equivalent of the CEO. Then you would have your compliance officer and money laundering reporting officer, your finance officer, your directors of the firm, risk officer. So all of those ones that I've named, those would be put forward in applications. So each individual would have to have an application submitted to the regulator as part of that application stage. So that's why you need to be able to identify them quite early on, if not necessarily employing them. And again, they would need to have the appropriate mix of skills and experience. So that would be looked at closely, especially when we're looking sometimes in this space at startup entities or new entrants to the market that sometimes come from a more tech background potentially. So there will be considerable scrutiny on their experience within that payment services space as well. And it is something that the regulator will look at, and also these individuals would expect it to be interviewed when we get later on into the process.
We're getting some good nods into what the actual process looks like now, and all the scrutiny and the fun interviewing that people have to go through. So I think that might be a good segue into part 2. So the actual application process itself. So what is this journey, and what do firms need to do across this very tricky process at the moment? So I wonder, maybe if we start back in the UK, maybe Lorraine, if you could give us a kind of a typical end-to-end roadmap from submission all the way through to decisioning, and maybe give us a sense of timelines. And I can see we have already had one question through, which is amazing, just about current timelines for EMI upgrades. So maybe give a sense of the full process and also the upgrades. So what is the journey? How long does it take?
Okay, yeah. So I'm going to give you a typical journey first of all, and then I will address the EMI upgrade question, which I'm assuming is a firm that's maybe already authorised, maybe as an API wanting to then become an EMI. I'm going to assume that, but let me take that one as a second point. The process will be relatively the same, but slightly different in some ways. So let's look at the actual time frame itself. Now, from the point of submission of your application, we're now looking at somewhere nearer, certainly by 6 months, you will know if the FCA are not happy with you, let me put it that way. And we will know at that point whether, you're going to probably be asked to withdraw your application. But generally, mostly, I would say around about the 9-month mark maximum. The FCA is getting better. They've got more resource in the team now, the authorisations team. So things are, to be fair, to them, things are getting better in that regard. So the process and how it works. So if you're engaging someone like ourselves, we will take anywhere between 2 to 3 months. It really depends on a few variables, and the biggest one of that being how ready the firm is and how quickly they interact with us and turn things around for us. We do a lot of the support, but we need information from the firm. So there's a bit of a preparation and research time in those initial couple of months where we seek to understand your business model, and therefore what regulatory activity are you going to be providing, and therefore which permissions or licenses you will need to support that regulatory activity, because we need to play that back to the FCA to lay that out for them. We then set about creating that sort of whole application pack. There's a plethora of documents that have to be put together, whether that's policies and other evidence that complete the application pack. So that includes a regulatory business plan, helping you with, well, we don't help with the financials, but we help you understand what you need to prepare in terms of financial forecasts, compliance manuals, organisational structures, what all that needs to look like. Completing the application form itself and any PSD or EMD forms that need to be completed on the individuals that are responsible for your business. We help you with all of that. And then at the end of a couple of months, we've got this nice pack that we then need to go ahead and submit. So we go ahead and submit. And I have to tell you that with the FCA, the submission process is a little bit, in my opinion, a bit clunky and painful. But we do sit side by side with our clients, because you have to go to upload those documents one at a time. And it sometimes can take many hours. It's very, very painful. But anyway, we sit with you, make sure that you don't miss anything. So you've now submitted, great, paid your fee, sit back and wait for what happens next. So within day, probably or immediately, you're going to get an acknowledgement to say, okay, we've got your application, basically we'll be in touch. Within usually now about a month, you're starting to get notification from the FCA to say, okay, we have now assigned you with a case officer. Your case officer is the person that is going to be responsible for assessing your application and making a recommendation to their manager that you ought to be approved, for example. So they're going to scrutinise your application in detail. During that sort of assessment phase, the case officer is going to reach out, ask questions, may need things clarified. Of course, we need to be prepared in the background to make sure we respond appropriately and promptly, because you should be ready, willing and organised, of course, before you actually submit. But it is at that point then they start also assessing, the FCA will assess the fitness and propriety of those key individuals. So, for example, the CEO, MLRO, and also conduct those interviews. So by about month 3, 4, we're starting to see sort of reach out for interviews with those key individuals and getting you prepared for those conversations. Once that's all happened, as I say, around about month 6 to month 9, you're going to get either being minded to approve or some form of conditional approval. We'll approve you as long as we see this, this or this. Or if you're unfortunate enough to be asked to withdraw, then for sure you'll know it. That's at a month 6 stage generally of the need to approve. So I think from application point to or submission point to determination, you're probably looking around 9 months maximum at the moment.
Mm-hmm. And then for the upgrade as well?
And for the upgrade, so we can assume that if you're already well organised as an already authorised business, you'll already have some of the nuts and bolts in place that support your business from the point of view, the policies, the systems, the controls, the people. So the preamble, the things that we help you with shouldn't be as cumbersome or as resource hungry. But what we need to do is just push those things a little step up and address some of the additional requirements that you would need to face into as EMI. Obviously, as an already regulated firm, you're already a known entity, but it is, if you're an API looking for an EMI, it's a completely fresh application. So you're going to be in the mix with everyone else, but obviously you may have, let's hope, a bit of good history with the FCA for them to go on. You're already an authorised firm, but it is by no manner of means an automated, like, open door. We know you come on in. You still have to prove yourselves as an EMI as opposed to an API, and address any additional risk and how you mitigate those risks associated with that particular business model. So it's not really going to give you a lot of leeway during the actual FCA authorisations process, but it certainly helps us when we're supporting you, because there's less to prepare for, because we assume you've already got a lot of the background documentation in place.
Yeah, there's still a lot of work to do for
still
that.
A lot of work to do. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, that is a very, very good, thorough examination of the UK process. I suppose in Dubai, are there any differences in terms of the end-to-end roadmap and timelines? I'm wondering if it's any shorter in Dubai. I mean, Sarah?
I'd say overall it's about the same, and the stages are similar. So I would say overall it looks quite similar, but there's probably broken down slightly differently. Mm-hmm. So our approach, you could probably bucket it into 3 categories. You've got the pre-applicant work, the application stage, and then the in-principle stage. So the pre-application phase is where we have that initial introductory call with the DFSA. It's where we work with you to build out your business plan and sort of identify exactly what it is you're doing and what does it look like, who are your key people going to be, what do your systems look like, and so forth. So we don't actually, on this side, we don't actually move straight to an application. You actually do need to submit that regulatory business plan to the DFSA first. They will review it. They will, it's an opportunity for them to pick up any potential red flags before you even get to that application stage, to be honest. And it gives them a chance to comment on the business plan, and we can make adjustments as needed. So that RBP process, it takes, depending on the quality of the regulatory business plan, probably 2 to 4 weeks for the DFSA to take a look at, and then they'll invite the firm to submit an application. Now, obviously, we're always working in the background on the application anyway, but once the invitation comes in, we then work with the firm to get the application in, which I guess you can call the phase 2, the actual application part. That looks very similar to the way that Lorraine has described. There'll be question rounds, there'll be interviews. The case officer will go about assessing the application. Their timeline from acceptance of an application to in principle approval is about 4 months-ish for a money services firm. Bearing in mind that when the application first goes in, there's some time there between submission and acceptance, because they will carry out all of their due diligence and regulatory checks and so forth before they accept an application. So there's a bit of extra time there. And then, assuming all goes well, the firm will be granted in-principle approval, which is similar to the FCA. Basically, it means the regulatory decision has been made and the firm needs to go about getting themselves operationally ready. And they have 6 months to do that. Obviously, it can be done much quicker, depending on how ready they are. And then once the in-principle conditions are met, then the final license is issued. I think one major delay that we do face in this region, which is specific to where we are, is obtaining the bank account can be quite time consuming. So that's both in terms of your operational account, but most importantly, your client money account. Client money account can take a lot of time to set up in this region. It is just one of those things that just takes quite a long time. So that's something that probably delays firms a little bit to get over that line to final license at the end. And then, of course, this is all sort of the process for a standard licensing route. If you're a firm that perhaps isn't coming from the UK and is a startup, has no regulatory history of carrying out this in any other jurisdiction, you may be encouraged to go through the innovation testing license route, which is it's basically a sandbox type approach, where firms go through a roughly year-long process of meeting certain key milestones, and then after that process, graduating to a standard license. And there may be some limitations placed on that firm during that time because it's more of a testing phase. So that's something as well for startup firms to take into consideration. But the overall timelines are broadly the same anyway.
Interesting. We have the innovation labs in the UK, but it's interesting to hear those differences for sure. So now we understand the end-to-end journey a little bit. I want to dive into the actual documents that we pulled together. Lorraine's already mentioned the documents at a high level in the UK. Again, same sort of question, very high level. What are the documents you need to pull together in Dubai, particularly on that business plan area? And just pausing as well, I've seen another question come in around the typical hiccups around FCA firms when they're applying for a license with the DFSA. But I think we'll pick up on that one a little bit later on in this section, because we're going to cover the key hiccups and problems and challenges. So we will definitely answer that one a little later on. But back to the documents. Maybe Barry, anything you want to sort of say on the documents and maybe the business plan in Dubai?
I think Sarah and Lorraine touched upon the business plan. Well, we've just seen a increasing trend actually for more detail within the regulatory business plan. So I think that sometimes helps with the next phase, being the application phase, but increasing amounts of detail going into that business plan, going into specifics around controls, from an AML perspective, and quite a lot of detail. So that's just been a trend where we've seen business plans maybe get a little bit more detailed and a little bit longer. So they are quite extensive documents, and certainly in the process with the DFSA, where there are some kind of iterative feedback kind of loops that we go through. So that's been an interesting process. But overall, you have the regulatory business plan that is then sort of looked at, where you've got a clear idea of what your business does, and really importantly, what the actual services that happen within the regulated environment within the DIFC. So sometimes, other providers are involved in the actual, to the customer. So it's really important that that's narrowed down to exactly what the regulated entity within the DIFC will do. And then you build out from there with the business plan itself. You have a clear sort of flow of funds and controls around that, group ownerships and things like that, governance structure. But on top of that, then you also have and you will submit all your manuals, like your AML manual, your compliance manual, your 3 years financial projections. And something that they've really focused in on is the controls around cybersecurity. So new rules came in at the start of this year, specific prescriptive requirements around cybersecurity, and they have looked, especially when firms in this space are attractive targets for cyber attacks and have been targets for them. There is a lot of interest in this area, so firms will have to submit their IT policy, their cyber incident response plans, and how the cyber is factored into their overall risk management structure. And we've had detailed feedback on these things where they've really been picked apart. So that really needs to be at a really good level going into this, into the application phase and whatever submitted, because again, it's one of those hot topics that the regulator look at.
I suppose actually, just Lorraine, I'm going to pull you in very quickly here because I know those are similar hot topics with the FCA at the moment.
Yeah, 100%. I was just nodding along there, actually. Completely. I think, this sector is seen as one that presents quite significant risk. And you think about it, the payment services sector is a very innovative one. It uses a lot of the new technology as it comes around. And so with innovation and the use of with that technological advancement comes risks, new ways in which criminals can use that technology for not good reasons. So absolutely, and a lot of the areas that the FCA focus on, very similar to what Barry said around how do you protect your business against those risks, particularly, cyber risk is a big thing, fraud and etc. So completely, and I think if not only do you need to have robust policy and procedure and systems and controls around that, you need to be able to evidence to them if they ask how that operates in practice, and where it can go terribly wrong for businesses because I'll just have a policy, that looks great, I do all of this stuff, I say I do it, and then when the FCA asks them questions on it, the people who are answering the questions answer something completely different or don't know what their policy says, or actually the regulator discovers that they can't do any of that stuff. They don't actually have the things in place that they say they do, and that's worse than having no policy at all. So definitely when it comes to any policy or procedure, but particularly those critical ones around your systems and controls, it's very, very important that those technical elements of your business are watertight, because it's a big risk to your business, to the sector, and to markets in general, of course, if it all goes a bit pear-shaped.
Certainly a risky world out there, and I'm speaking from the financial crime side, from my side. Absolutely, lots of different risks and challenges for sure. And before I actually come back to Sarah on the sort of systems and tools and controls piece, we have had another question, just very briefly, Barry. Somebody has asked whether or not the DFSA has changed its process around submission of the business plan. I don't know if it has at all. Have you got any sight over the process steps around the submission of the business plan?
Yeah, and then Sarah, please feel free to chime in on this one as well. There is always talk of this process changing, because they are looking to break out that into the application part of it. So where the business plans are fairly similar, I would say, in terms of their structure and how the regulator likes to receive them. So there is talk of that being put into more of an application style form, but to my knowledge that hasn't happened yet. So there is still the process of submitting a business plan and having that reviewed, but we're aware that there is the intention to have that put into a form. It is different if you are going through the innovation testing license process. That is a different process where it's not a regulatory business plan. So if you are a startup, you are not able, the regulator doesn't feel that you should be going for the full license straight away, you would be put through the ITL process, which is an application form that covers much of the information that isn't a regulatory business plan, But through the course of your ITL, if you get accepted, through the course of your ITL, then you build up your regulatory business plan. So that's one of those requirements. So I'm not sure if that was the difference that the question was referring to, but we certainly know there's the intention to potentially move away from the business plan for applications.
Sounds like a very sensible intention. But yeah, no, that's very, very useful. I suppose coming up back to you then, Sarah, just on the actual systems part. So more on the implementation of your policy and procedures through things like tooling, your systems, etc. In terms of testing and looking at these tools as part of the application journey, how much does the DFSA actually come in and have a look at these?
Yeah, they are interested. So, I mean, a lot of firms in this sector have a heavy reliance on software and other online tools and things to deliver these activities. So, your application, website, platform, whatever you're using to deliver your activities to clients needs to be at an advanced stage of development, and it needs to be able to be presented to the regulator for them to have a look at. So whether it be a demo format, at least to start with. So you do need to have that in place before making an application. Now, obviously it's not going to be live yet, and maybe you're still sort of building out some of the final pieces, but certainly at the beginning of the application process, they'll want to take a look at it. And then again, usually at the end, they'll want to see the final product. They'll be looking at, the onboarding processes. What does that look like? How does sanction screening work? What client due diligence and transaction monitoring tools are you using? Do you have the relevant disclosures on your platform? What sort of material are you going to have on there? Does it fit within the promotions rules? How do you navigate? Is it easy for clients to find information about your regulatory status, your fees, and other pertinent information? And in some cases in the past, it used to sort of be a bit more frequent than I've seen recently, but sometimes the DFSA will make it an in-principle condition that the software that you're using is independently assurance tested as well in some cases. So you may actually need to have your tool tested by a third party as well. And yes, you'll need to sit down with the regulator and be able to demonstrate the platform to them.
Perfect. Lorraine, very, very quickly, does the FCA do any sort of similar testing of tooling?
I'm not sure if I would label it testing, but I would absolutely agree with Sarah's point there. What they see around the sort of advanced stage systems, that's the same for the FCA. So, you can't go in sort of half prepared saying, well, we've got that, but we'll kind of develop this as we go along. Remember that the FCA's strap line is you've got to be ready, willing, and organised from the point you submit your application, not next week, next month, or the year after. They expect to be able to do the business you're recommending in your business plan if they were to authorise you the next day, which of course is never going to happen. But that's what the expectation is. I think the same requirements around the onboarding, the AML controls, the disclosures, etc. One thing they'll ask you for evidence of these things. They won't come and sit beside you and ask you to show them it like as a live kind of demonstration as such, but they will ask questions. They will ask for evidence of it. Also looking at things like your website. Is what you're saying on the website appropriate? Are you setting yourself up to be selling something that you're not, or are you already looking like you're doing activity that you're not even authorised yet? Those kind of things can sometimes trip a firm up incidentally. I think the big thing just around risk assessment, and there's an IT risk assessment that a firm's got to complete just around how they manage those risks. Got to look at like schematics, IT infrastructure type of diagrams, how the information will flow around the business. So, anything at all in terms of being able to evidence those effective systems and controls are in place to help manage risk associated with the operations, whether that's financial, operational, compliance or otherwise. You've got to have those mechanics in place, and you've got to be able to show that they're there. So risk assessments being carried out on, let's say, your perimeter, make sure that no one can sort of come in through the back door and steal all your data. Those are the kind of bits of evidence the FCA will look at, but they don't necessarily join a call where you step them through systems. That doesn't happen. But a very similar view, I think, in terms of what Sarah was referring to there.
Perfect. Got it. So no live demos, but you need to be ready, willing,
Yeah,
and organised for sure.
Yeah.
All right. So, interest of time, I'm going to come to Lorraine first, and then across to Barry. What are your top failure points on this journey? And this comes back to one of the questions we've had in a little bit earlier around, what are the common issues and challenges that firms might face? In interest of time, maybe 2 or 3. Maybe Lorraine in the UK. What are the common top problems that you see in this process?
Okay, if I had to put a label on this really quickly, it's just being unprepared. Okay, and firms often go ahead without seeking expert guidance and support as well, which isn't helpful. But it is mostly just not being ready and organised, being underprepared in many ways, not having, just as we've discussed, those systems and controls already in place to run your business, lack of good governance, and lack of expertise in those individuals within your business. Again, one of the big ones around the individuals is having those controlling your business sitting outside of the UK. If you're going to go ahead with people in those positions, in those jurisdictions, you're absolutely setting yourself up to fail, and it just will not fly. So it's underpreparedness and lack of good governance, I guess, if I was to sort of capture it under a couple of labels.
Perfect. Those 2. Same question for you, Barry. What are the maybe top few common failure points?
I think I would try to bucket them in broad areas. I'd say a really focused and presentable understanding of what the business is going to do and what it's responsible for. So often we'll have firms talking about what we will do, and they'll be talking about there'll be group entities involved in that, or different parts of the process will be done elsewhere. What the regulator wants to understand is what exactly will be under the control of the entity in the DIFC. So you don't want to kind of muddy the waters and confuse what it is you're applying for. You need to know exactly what that entity is going to do and what it's responsible for, so that it doesn't, get, you don't just start going down rabbit holes of questions. The regulator wants to do that, or you gave the wrong impression at an initial meeting or discussion. So you need to really know what that is, and equally then you need to apply that to the terminology of the DFSA. Essentially, if this is within the DIFC, it would be how that works, because there is differences between the terminology and the way the license activities are described than the UK and other jurisdictions. So you don't want to give the impression that this is just a copy and paste from an application you've done recently. You don't want to give the impression that it's not you're not committed properly to this application and just you're rolling out another one. I think it's making sure that you know exactly what you're doing and it's aligned to the requirements of the centre, and also that you're committed to that centre as well. So you know that you are going to be committing to having office space there. You know you're going to have the right number of people there, and that's all within the plan, and that is given. All of that is understood, and that impression is given from the outset.
Perfect. I think that nicely answers some of the questions around, what are the hiccups if you are an FCA firm looking to apply here? I mean, just getting the terminology right is going to be the first step and absolutely key. Okay, so we are now on part 3 of the journey. We're moving into the post-submission phase. So we're not leaving a formal time for Q&A, I think, but I'm hopefully weaving in the questions throughout the session. And we've had a few more that are particularly interesting, and we'll try to weave these in. One that I will try to answer towards the end is the percentage of approvals in each jurisdiction, but maybe we kind of cover that at the end of the session. So in the post-submission phase, then, this is you sent all your documents across. What then happens next? So, I mean, Lorraine, what happens in the UK? What are the steps at this sort of stage of the process?
So post-submission, you really are in the hands of the FCA in terms of which direction they want to take it next. So it's just really what I've kind of described before as part of that process. Post-submission, you're waiting to get your case handler identified and assigned to you. You're then very likely, despite us all having put together all of the documentation you think you could ever need and what's required for the application, which is the important thing, the FCA could come back and ask for additional documents, additional information. One of the requests we're seeing coming to us more frequently now is for a risk appetite statement, not something that's part of the actual application pack at the moment. It's not required as part of the application pack, but it is, in my opinion, I can understand why they're asking for it. So it's a reasonable request. So you're likely to be asked for further documentation. You're likely to be asked further questions. You will go through that interview stage and process where they will want to explore and fully understand your business model. Now, during that process, everybody who is involved in your business absolutely needs to be 100% behind and understanding of whatever you've put down on paper, from your business plan to your policies and procedures and your systems and controls, because anyone in that business could be brought forth for an interview, whether that's in person or face-to-face. And I've even got a client where it's been in person and now they also want it face-to-face. So anything is possible in this particular assessment phase. But it is all about really making sure that you can articulate what your business is about. And I liked Barry's point he made earlier about, let's not muddy the waters. What is it you're trying to do? Why are you trying to do it? What's the benefit of you trying to do it? What market are you hoping to plug into? So being able to describe your business and your business model eloquently and effectively, and address from top to bottom. Just because you're CEO and you've got a head of compliance doesn't mean to say that compliance is not your responsibility. You need to be able to answer some of those compliance related questions as well. So it will be all around that exploration and pushing of buttons by the FCA, just to, in many good ways, pick your business apart to see whether there's any holes in it, because then they'll find a hole, and if they find a hole, they'll dig deeper. So I think it's really that next stage is all for the FCA to assess your application, and then depending on how you perform, how well organised you are, how well documented, how effective your systems and controls are, you'll then reach that determination point of you'll be approved, you need to withdraw and come back to us with some information, or actually you just need to, we're rejecting you altogether, which doesn't happen very, very often at all. It's mostly withdraw and come back to us. So that's kind of what happens in that next phase. We are, of course, on hand to help answer some of those questions, help you, support you with what do I need to say here. What would I be expected to be answering in this interview? So we're there the whole time, but it really is the firm's application. So it's on them to make sure that they can stand up against their own application and documents.
Yeah, I think it's pretty tough at this stage. I mean, maybe, I know you've got an ex-FCA in your team that does a bit of a sort of mock interview grilling type situation, but maybe one or two tips on before going into those interviews, just in the interest of time, maybe one or two.
I mean, be prepared, be prepared, be prepared. I mean, there's no other thing I can tell you. Just be prepared. You've got to know your business. You've got to know your policies, because they're going to ask about them. What's your view on X, right? If you're the MLRO, still expect to need to understand business strategy and direction, because you're building your controls around that. So don't rest on your laurels and don't think that's not really my area of expertise. Expect the unexpected is what I would say. But if you're not prepared, you're going to fail 100%.
Absolutely. I know we've only got a few minutes left, but I do want to sneak in this extra question. So you mentioned they might ask for additional documents. They come back with clarifications. Is that a good sign that they're actually engaging with you?
Yes and no. It depends at what point in the journey they're asking those questions and what questions they're asking. Because if they're asking questions of you for things that we would otherwise assume that you should have given them, that could be a problem. It depends on the tone and the type of question they're asking. And this is where sometimes our involvement does pay dividends, because the FCA may ask a question that on the face of it, the client might think, okay, the question is A, then I'm going to answer B. When in fact, we could say, well, actually, we know where they're heading with this one. We think behind the scenes, this is what's worrying them. So it's not always as clear cut as it seems either. But I think them asking questions is them asking questions. Yeah. You can't always say it's a good thing. You can't always say it's a bad thing. It just depends what and when they're asking such questions.
Classic politician's answer.
Sorry about
Excellent.
that. Trying to set up the things.
All right. Well, moving to Dubai then to wrap up. So, what can firms expect at this stage on the other side? Maybe starting with Sarah, post submission.
Yeah, so I mean, honestly, it's very similar. Everything that Lorraine has described is very much on par with what you would expect over here with the DFSA. So post submission, you may not hear anything for a little while. They'll be carrying out their due diligence, and potentially, if you're coming from another jurisdiction where you're regulated, they'll write to that regulator and seek some feedback. So they will wait for all of that to come in before actually formally accepting the application. So don't worry too much if you haven't heard anything straight away. And then once that's all okay, then you receive your formal acceptance and your case officer name and contact. Similarly, it's question rounds, requests for more information. No matter how prepared you are, there's always more information to provide. That's just the way it goes. And then interviews. So we also prepare our interviewees for that process. I think in terms of preparing yourself for that, I mean, again, obviously preparation is very important, but not just understanding of business, but also the jurisdiction that you're going to be working within. You know, DIFC is different to the UK. It has its own, I guess, you know, factors to consider. You've got the FATF evaluation that was recently undertaken. The country's been grey listed, national risk assessments, all of that. The DFSA will want you to have considered and factored in and understood because you'll be operating in this jurisdiction. So you need to sort of understand where you are and what that looks like. So that's really important. There's also the federal AML legislation that applies. So even though you are operating in the DIFC under DFSA regulation, you have the federal regulator as well for AML, and you still need to abide by those requirements as well. So you need to be across that as well as the DFSA AML rules. AML, cybersecurity are two big areas that they will focus on. And again, what Lorraine said before, if you're an SDO, you are basically the main point of contact throughout this process. And it is a very senior position. You are ultimately responsible and you are expected to be across everything, really. Even if you are outsourcing your compliance and AML and you have a third party supporting you, you can't outsource that responsibility. You are still responsible. So just making sure that you are on top of everything so that you can respond quickly through that process. I think that's it.
Perfect. But I mean, Barry, any final pearls of wisdom you would give to anyone doing an interview? We've got preparedness, and I have a feeling it's going to be the same.
I wouldn't suggest being underprepared. That's for sure. But absolutely, I think it's really important. I think again, sort of just due consideration for the regulations, understanding again exactly what your business does and what you're responsible for, understanding the risks that go with that. Understanding, you know, certainly from an AML perspective, it's really, really important from all the reasons that Sarah talked about. And also, I think the principles. So I've been in interviews where I've been asked the principles for authorized individuals and principles for authorized firms, which are, you know, there in the rule book. They expect you to understand them, to apply them, to know, you know, what you're responsible for. So, you know, it can come, you know, down to that sort of level of detail, not to wanting to scare anyone, and also really just understanding whatever role it is someone's applying for, their responsibilities and how that sits. If you're sitting within a group structure, how those responsibilities are escalated, either, you know, up or down the group as well. So where you sit in that structure, making sure that the mind and management is within the centre, that you're not just, you know, I don't know, a puppet that's been put there for reasons, you know, just to have a body there. They really want to know that you will be, you know, decision makers that will be put in place and be able to effectively carry out their roles as a regulated individual.
Perfect. I'm going to do a quick fire round then to wrap up. What is the likelihood of getting over the line in these two jurisdictions? So, I mean, we had a question earlier. What is the percentage of approvals for EMIs in both jurisdictions? I don't know if you can give an exact number. We're not asking for an exact number, but maybe Lorraine in the UK, how likely is it that you're going to get over?
Okay,
very
so
quickly.
Very quick. I can't give you specific numbers just for EMIs, I mean, in the UK, it has been, and there's good reasons why, which we won't have time to go into, but it has been notoriously difficult to become authorised, and there's many reasons for that. I think the figures are slightly less than double figures at the moment, but in amongst that mix, there are firms who are going at this, like, I would say, a little blindly, in terms of just doing their applications themselves without understanding the full requiremms, who are looking to govern their business outside of the UK. So it's diluted by, I think, a lot of poor players in the industry as well. The FCA is looking at those numbers though, and is cognizant of the fact that they are low, but at the end of the day, they cannot take the risk of authorising firms that are not fit to be authorised. So I think the numbers are lowish at the moment, but they have been getting better. But I think that's just down to, unfortunately, the dilution of poor players in the sector. So I think if you've got, just quickly, if you've got a good application, you're well supported, you know what you're doing, your opportunity is much higher.
So it's hard but possible.
Hard,
same question.
Very, very possible. Yeah.
Barry or Sarah, same question.
Yeah, same response, I think.
Same response.
To be honest with you, in the interest of time. No, I think it is. It's about having that good quality submission. And as Lorraine talked about, you know, sometimes the regulator will say maybe you want to, you know, pull back and think about this a little longer. So it's hard to get those failure rates. It is. Look, it's not easy. Let's be completely brutally honest. It's an area where it's under a lot of scrutiny. Certainly here, the AML risk they view as a key, you know, factor that they want to really try and not avoid, but manage it as tightly as possible. So payment services, money services firms do bring with it that risk, and that's what they will, you know, be a huge focus. So it's certainly not an easy process, but like Lorraine said, with the right application, the right support, the right, you know, infrastructure and controls, then you know, any well-formed application should proceed.
Mm-hmm. A positive end then. So to wrap up, thank you so much to all of you for joining today. All of our contact details are on the screen with these marvelous photos of us. So of course, we've got our email addresses. We're also on LinkedIn as well. So please do reach out. We're always happy to carry on the conversation. This webinar has also been recorded, and I think we're putting the recording online soon. Again, we've got Thistle Initiatives on LinkedIn. I'm sure Clarity are also there as well. So please do follow us and reach out. So yeah, have a wonderful rest of the day, and hopefully we shall speak to you soon.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thank you. Bye.